My name is Olivia, and for 10 years, I have been married to my husband, Daniel. We live in a quiet neighborhood in Enugu, where the air is thick with the scent of roasted corn and fresh palm wine from Mama Nkechi's roadside store. Our home is not the fanciest, but it is filled with love, laughter, and the sounds of our two children, Ethan and Michelle, running around. For the most part, I have been content. But that was before I started noticing my neighbor, Abigail, and her husband, Michael. Their life looked like something out of a storybook, perfect, flawless, enviable. Every morning, as I swept the front yard, I watched Michael walk Abigail to their sleek, black SUV. Michael would open the door for Abigail like a true gentleman, and kiss her forehead before she stepped in. She always looked radiant, draped in beautifully embroidered George wrappers, her gold earrings catching the morning sun. They spoke softly, laughed often, and moved like two people deeply in love. Meanwhile, my own husband barely noticed me anymore. Daniel would rush off to work, leaving me in my simple Ankara gown, struggling to get the children ready for school. The more I watched, the more resentment brewed inside me. Why can't Daniel be like Michael? I would ask myself. Why doesn't he treat me like a queen? I started seeing flaws in my own marriage that never bothered me before. I nagged Daniel more, compared him to Michael in my mind, and sighed heavily whenever he did something I disapproved of. I was drowning in envy, and I didn't even realize it. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard something unusual. It was past midnight, and the neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of a generator humming. Then came a sharp noise, like something heavy crashing to the floor, from Abigail and Michael's house. I sat up instantly, my heart racing. A few seconds later, I heard muffled voices, angry and tense. I tiptoed to the window, peeking through the curtain. The lights in their house flickered, and then, silence. Fear gripped me. What was happening in that house? The couple I admired so much, were they fighting? No, it couldn't be. Michael was the perfect husband, always so gentle, always so loving. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I had imagined things. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next day, I watched Abigail closely. She stepped out of her house wearing sunglasses, even though the sky was cloudy. She moved stiffly, her usual graceful walk replaced with cautious steps. My stomach twisted. Was she hiding something? That evening, as she threw out her trash, I saw it, a bruise on her arm, dark and swollen. A chill ran down my spine. My perfect neighbor, the woman I envied, was suffering. And I had been too blinded by jealousy to see it. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying what I had seen, the bruise on Abigail's arm, the stiffness in her walk, the tension in her movements. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so focused on their public display of perfection that I failed to see the truth lurking beneath? I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of my husband beside me. A strange guilt crept into my heart. I had spent months resenting Daniel, wishing he were more like Michael, without realizing that Michael might not be the man I thought he was. The next morning, as I prepared breakfast, I kept stealing glances at Daniel. He was busy helping Ethan tie his shoelaces while Michelle clung to his leg, giggling. He looked tired but happy. He wasn't a man of grand gestures, but he was always present. He stayed up late when the kids were sick, helped with their homework, and never let me carry the heavy bags from the market. I had been so blinded by Abigail's seemingly perfect marriage that I had forgotten to appreciate the little things Daniel did for me every day. But my curiosity about Abigail's situation wouldn't let me rest. That afternoon, I decided to talk to her. I waited until I saw her step outside, clutching a basket of laundry. I took a deep breath and walked over. "Abigail, good afternoon," I greeted, forcing a smile. She turned quickly, her sunglasses still on even though we were under the shade. "Oh, Olivia." "Good afternoon," she replied, her voice hesitant. I hesitated for a moment, then blurted out, "Are you okay?" Abigail stiffened. For a moment, I thought she would ignore me and walk away. But then, to my shock, her lower lip quivered. She looked away, blinking rapidly, as if trying to stop herself from crying. "I'm fine," she said quickly. too quickly. My heart ached. I recognized that tone. It was the voice of someone who was afraid to speak the truth. I wanted to push further, to tell her that I had heard the noises last night, that I had seen the bruise. But I knew I had to be careful. If Michael truly was hurting her, she might be too scared to admit it. If you ever need anything, I'm just next door, I said gently. Abigail nodded stiffly, then hurried back inside. As the door shut behind her, I felt a deep unease settle over me. Something was very, very wrong. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy with worry. I couldn't shake off the image of Abigail's bruised arm, the fear in her voice, the way she hurried back inside as if running from an unseen enemy. I thought of all the times I had watched her and Michael from my window, envying their perfect love. How could I have been so blind? Daniel stood beside me, half asleep, and mumbled, "Are you okay?" I hesitated before whispering, "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I was restless. I felt like a shadow had crept into our neighborhood, one that had been there all along, unnoticed. Abigail was suffering, and no one seemed to know. Or perhaps, no one dared to talk about it. The next day, as I walked to the market to buy fresh okra for dinner, I passed by the women sitting under the big udala tree, gossiping as they peeled cassava. They always had something to say about everyone in the neighborhood. I slowed down, pretending to adjust the basket on my head, hoping to catch any mention of Abigail and Michael. A husband should love his wife, not treat her like a prisoner, one woman said in a hushed voice. My ears perked up. Haven't you noticed how she never speaks to anyone anymore? Another added. And that bruise last week. She said she fell, but who falls that often? My stomach twisted. I had been right. I wasn't the only one who had noticed. I wanted to ask more, but I knew better than to interrupt the women's talk. Instead, I quickly bought what I needed and hurried home, my mind racing. I needed to do something. But what? If Abigail was truly in danger, could I even help her? That evening, as the sun cast a golden glow over the compound, I saw Abigail step out again. This time, she wasn't wearing sunglasses. My breath caught in my throat, her left eye was swollen, a deep purple bruise spreading across her cheek. My hands clenched into fists. I had seen enough. I didn't wait. I rushed over to her. "Abigail," I said firmly, my voice shaking with emotion. She flinched at my urgency, but I didn't stop. "Please, tell me the truth. Did Michael do this to you?" Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she would deny it again. But then, her shoulders slumped, and in a broken whisper, she said, "Yes." I felt like my heart had stopped. The man I had admired, the marriage I had envied, it had all been a lie. Abigail's confession felt like a cold slap across my face. I stood there, unable to speak, my heart pounding like the distant beat of an Igbo drum. For months, I had watched her and Michael with admiration, longing for the love I thought they had. But now, standing before me, Abigail was not the glowing, cherished wife I had imagined. She was broken, terrified, and trapped. She glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone might hear us. "Please, Olivia, don't tell anyone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "If Michael finds out I told you, I don't know what he'll do." Her words sent a chill through me. I knew I had to choose my next response carefully. If I pushed too hard, she might shut down completely. If I did nothing, I would be allowing this horror to continue. "Abigail," I said gently, "you don't have to live like this. You deserve to be safe." Tears streamed down her face. "I don't know how to live. He controls everything, my phone, my money, even my movements. He says if I ever try to leave, he'll make sure I regret it." She inhaled sharply. "And he means it, Olivia. I've seen what he's capable of." A wave of helplessness washed over me. I wanted to tell her to pack her things and run, but I understood that it wasn't that simple. Leaving an abusive man like Michael wasn't just about walking out the door, it was about survival. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're not alone," I promised. "We'll figure this out together." That night, I couldn't sleep again. I turned to Daniel, watching his peaceful face in the dim light. I had spent so much time wishing he were like Michael, and now, I was overwhelmed with gratitude that he wasn't. My marriage wasn't perfect, but I was safe. I was loved. I had taken my husband's quiet acts of kindness for granted, his patience, his steady presence, the way he made sure I never carried the burdens of our family alone. The next morning, I waited for Abigail outside her house, determined to help her. When she saw me, she hesitated, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "You don't have to be afraid," I told her. "You have people who care about you." She shook her head. "If I leave, where will I go?" I had an idea. My aunt, Esther, runs a women's shelter in town. It's safe, and she can help you start fresh. Abigail's eyes widened, but before she could respond, the front door creaked open. Michael stepped out. My stomach tightened. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his dark eyes bore into me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with suspicion. Abigail flinched and immediately took a step back, her entire body stiff with fear. My heart pounded. If I said the wrong thing, I could make things worse for her. I forced a smile. "Oh, I was just inviting Abigail over for some pepper soup later," I lied smoothly. "I made too much last night." Michael's gaze lingered on me for a moment before he smirked. "That's kind of you, Olivia. But my wife doesn't have time for idle visits. She has responsibilities here." Abigail dropped her gaze to the ground like a scolded child. My hands balled into fists. As Michael disappeared back inside, Abigail turned to me, eyes wide with fear. "He's watching me," she whispered. "I can't leave. You know." I swallowed hard. Michael was dangerous. He wasn't going to let her go easily. I had to come up with a better plan. I walked back to my house, my mind racing. I had always seen myself as just a neighbor, just Olivia, the woman who cooked for her family, swept her front yard, and envied the love she thought Abigail had. But now, I knew too much. I couldn't unsee the pain in Abigail's eyes or forget the bruise on her cheek. Doing nothing was no longer an option. Daniel noticed my silence during dinner. As we ate our steaming bowls of ogbono soup with pounded yam, he reached across the table and touched my hand. "You're not yourself today," he said softly. I hesitated. Should I tell him? Would he understand? My husband wasn't the type to poke his nose into other people's business, but this wasn't just gossip. It was a life at stake. I took a deep breath and said, "Daniel, Michael is hurting Abigail." His eyes darkened. He put his spoon down and leaned forward. "What do you mean?" I told him everything, the bruise, the fear in Abigail's voice, the way Michael controlled her every move. As I spoke, Daniel's jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around his cup of palm wine. "That coward," he muttered. And to think we all believed he was the perfect husband. A lump formed in my throat. I don't know what to do. She's scared to leave. Daniel sighed, rubbing his forehead. Leaving a man like that is dangerous. If he finds out, he could hurt her worse. His words sent a shiver down my spine. I had considered that possibility, but hearing Daniel say it made it feel even more real. "Then what do we do?" I asked. "We can't just sit back and watch." Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She needs a plan. A safe way out. And she needs to leave when he least expects it." The next day, I waited until I saw Abigail hanging clothes outside and rushed to her. I spoke to Daniel, I said quickly. "We want to help you." Her eyes darted around nervously. "Olivia, please, Michael is always watching." "I know," I whispered, lowering my voice. "But if you don't leave now, when will you? You deserve better than this." Tears filled her eyes. "I want to go. But I don't know how." I took her hand. "We'll create a plan. My aunt's shelter will take you in. We'll help you live without him knowing." Abigail hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." That night, I sat with Daniel and mapped out every detail. Abigail would pretend everything was normal for the next few days. Then, on a market day, when Michael would be out for hours, she would take only what she could carry and come to our house. From there, we would take her to my aunt's shelter. It was a risky plan, but it was the only way. As the days passed, I watched Abigail play her role perfectly. She smiled at Michael, acted normal, and pretended nothing was wrong. But behind those smiles was a woman preparing to reclaim her life. Finally, the day arrived. Market day. The moment Abigail had been waiting for. Everything was set. Or so we thought. Because Michael was one step ahead of us. The sun had barely risen that market day when I felt my heart racing. Abigail had planned everything down to the smallest detail, but nothing had prepared us for what was about to unfold. We had agreed to meet at my house just after Michael left for his usual trip to the market. I stood by the window, watching the street, waiting for her to signal me. But time passed, and there was no sign of her. I paced back and forth, anxiety tightening my chest. My thoughts raced. What if something had gone wrong? What if Michael had suspected something? I tried to push the fear from my mind, but the unease only grew stronger. Just as I was about to step outside, I saw Abigail walking down the street, her steps hurried and almost frantic. She looked over her shoulder as if someone were chasing her. My breath caught in my throat. Something was wrong. Something had gone wrong. I rushed to the gate to meet her. Abigail, what happened? Where's Michael? I asked, my voice trembling. She glanced nervously over her shoulder again, and I could see the fear in her eyes. He's home, she whispered. He knew. He was waiting for me when I tried to leave. He confronted me, Olivia. He said he would never let me go. My heart sank. I could see the devastation in her face. Abigail had tried to escape, but Michael had found out. He must have suspected something when she started acting differently over the past few days. Now, she was trapped again. He's watching me now, Abigail continued, her voice shaking. I don't know what to do. He'll hurt me, Olivia. He promised he would if I ever tried to leave him. I swallowed hard. The weight of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. There was no way Michael would let her go that easily. He had already shown his true nature, and now, he was making sure she knew he would stop at nothing to keep her under his control. Without thinking, I grabbed Abigail's hand. You're not alone in this. We can't give up now. I'll help you. We'll figure out a way. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. But how? Michael's too strong, too powerful. What can we do? I didn't have an answer. The fear was real, and the danger was bigger than I had anticipated. But I couldn't give up on her, not now, not when she had come so far. That night, Daniel and I stayed awake, discussing the next steps. He insisted that we couldn't just stand by anymore. Michael was dangerous, and if he was determined to keep Abigail in that marriage, we had to act fast. I'll talk to my cousin, Chuka, Daniel said. He's a police officer. If Michael is threatening her, we have to get the law involved. We can't let him keep doing this. I nodded, grateful for Daniel's strength. We have to make sure Abigail is safe first. She can't go back there. I'll take her to my aunt's shelter. It's the only place she'll be safe for now. The next day, Daniel spoke to Chuka, who promised to take immediate action. With his help, we planned to move Abigail that very evening. That night, when the moon was high, Abigail slipped quietly out of her house, taking only a small bag with clothes and essentials. She met me in the alleyway behind our homes. The plan was simple: head to my house first, then we would drive her to the shelter. But as we moved quickly through the darkened streets, the sound of footsteps echoed behind us. My heart skipped a beat. I turned to look, and there he was, Michael. His face was twisted in fury, and his eyes burned with rage. You think you can run from me? He shouted, his voice low and threatening. You belong to me, Abigail. No one will take you from me. Abigail froze, terror etched on her face. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to run, but fear held her in place. I stepped in front of her, my heart hammering. Michael, stop. You don't have to do this. Let her go. He sneered, stepping closer. "This is none of your business, Olivia. Stay out of it." But I wasn't going to stand by and watch him destroy her. "It is my business," I said firmly. "Abigail is my friend. And I won't let you hurt her anymore." The tension in the air was thick, and I feared for both our lives. But just as Michael took another step forward, a car pulled up beside us. It was Daniel and Chuka. "Michael." Chuka's voice was authoritative, commanding. "Step away from them. You are under arrest for domestic abuse and threats." Michael froze, his face turning pale as he realized he was trapped. Chuka quickly moved in and placed him in handcuffs, while Daniel stood by, watching closely. Abigail and I exchanged a look of relief, though it was bittersweet. "Don't ever come near her again," Daniel said coldly, his voice filled with anger. Michael was led into the back of the police car, his eyes burning with fury but powerless to do anything now. As the car drove away, Abigail collapsed into my arms, sobbing. "I'm free," she whispered, her voice broken. And in that moment, I realized how far I had come, from envying her perfect life to helping her escape the shadow that had loomed over her for so long. As I hugged her tightly, I understood something profound. The envy I had felt for Abigail's life had blinded me to my own blessings. My marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was built on trust, respect, and love, things that Michael had never given Abigail. The truth had shattered my illusions, but it had also opened my eyes. Abigail was free now. And I was grateful for the lessons I had learned along the way. The drive to my aunt's shelter was silent except for Abigail's quiet sniffles. She stared out of the window, her fingers trembling in her lap. Even though Michael was gone, the fear still clung to her like a shadow. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're safe now," I whispered. She nodded, but I could tell that safety still felt like a foreign concept to her. When we arrived at the shelter, Aunt Esther welcomed us with open arms. She was a strong woman, known in the community for her fierce determination to help women escape abusive homes. The moment she saw Abigail's bruised face and hollow eyes, her expression softened. "You don't have to explain, my dear," she said gently. "You're home now." Abigail broke down, sobbing into my aunt's arms. I felt my own eyes well up, but I held back my tears. This wasn't about me, it was about Abigail finally being free. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself staring at Daniel again. He was already asleep, his arm draped over his chest. A deep warmth filled me. I had spent so long comparing him to Michael, wishing he were more romantic, more expressive. But now, I saw him clearly for the first time. Daniel wasn't a man of grand gestures, but he was a good man. He was patient when I was impatient, steady when I was anxious. He didn't buy me expensive gifts or shower me with constant praise, but he showed his love in 1,000 small ways, by making sure the generator was on when there was no power, by peeling yam for me when I was too tired, by carrying Michelle on his back when she fell asleep at a family gathering. I had been so blind. I had envied Abigail's illusion of a perfect marriage while ignoring the real love that had been in front of me all along. The next morning, as I served breakfast, I placed Daniel's cup of tea in front of him and kissed his cheek. He looked up, surprised. "What was that for?" he asked with a grin. I smiled. "For being you." He laughed. "Well, I should get random kisses more often." I chuckled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. My marriage wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was enough. Days passed, and life slowly returned to normal. I visited Abigail often at the shelter, watching as she began to heal. Her bruises faded, but the scars inside her would take longer to disappear. Yet, there was hope in her eyes now, a light that had been missing before. One evening, as we sat outside the shelter, watching the sun set over the rooftops, she turned to me and said, "Olivia, thank you. If you hadn't helped me, I don't know where I'd be right now." I squeezed her hand. "You saved yourself, Abigail. I just helped you find the door." She smiled, the first real smile I had seen from her in a long time. "I hope I find a love like yours one day. A love that's real." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. "You will," I promised. And next time, you'll know what real love looks like. As I walked home that night, I felt lighter. I had spent so much time looking at the shadows in my life, wishing for something else. But now, I saw the truth. Love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect appearances. It was about kindness, safety, and trust. I stepped into my house, where Daniel was playing with the kids, laughing as they climbed all over him. He looked up at me and winked. "You're back." And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, feeling completely content that I was home. Moral of the story: don't compare your marriage to others. Focus on your own, nurture it, and appreciate the love you have. What looks perfect on the outside may be hiding deep pain. True love isn't about appearances, it's about kindness, safety, and respect. Thank you for watching Storytime with African Tales. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful African stories filled with moral lessons. See you next time.